Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Donald Weeks, the founder and CEO of ClearPath AI. And today I'm joined by Jack Hamilton. He's the founder and CEO of C6 Systems. Jack, with your extensive background in critical network initiatives for the Department of Defense, and now leading C6 Systems in the hub of medical device innovation in Southern California, you bring a unique, valuable perspective to the improving healthcare systems. Welcome today.
Thank you. Well, good morning.
Yeah, morning. Well, Jack, tell me a little bit about your background and how you came about founding C6 Systems.
My educational background is laser electro-optics and quantum physics. Back in the very early 90s with the birth of telecom, where they had just recently invented fiber optics back then and were able to put light down fiber optic cable. And as we know that today, that's how we stream our Netflix and Disney and all of that. And the internet is based on the huge bandwidth gains that you could get through fiber optic telecommunications. Back then, a foot of fiber was about $25, and a laser diode that shined light in the fiber was about $300 or $400. And if you wanted a laser diode to coupled into a fiber, it was about $1,200. So I worked at a research company named Newport Corporation, and we developed a system to align and tunnel light through fiber optics. And that was a product that we had sold to a lot of R&D labs, IBM Almaden Research Center, Hewlett Packard Research Center, because they were all of course, the titans of telecom and building interlinks between computers. Networking was just starting to happen then. The intranet was starting to be publicized, available to the public back then, not just universities and government. I'm also a very good technical writer, and there's an important point about that. So I wrote a lot of documentations and manuals and how-to guides. I spent a lot of time with customers installing that very complex optical automated software system, and did a lot of software development along those lines. And because of my background on laser optics, of course, lasers and optics are used in med. And I eventually ended up working for doing consulting for a company called LensX. LensX developed a femtosecond cataract laser console. The technology was invented by Interlace. Interlace was bought out. And then the founders of Interlace created LensX. And LensX was acquired by Alcon for about $750 million. So I was there for several years, even doing the transition from LensX to Alcon. And so I've done a lot of work in regulated space in the past 15, 20 years, including the documentation. And that's something, we touch on here is regulated space. What does that mean? In med device, having something work and testing the working product is, of course, critical and important. But what's more important to the FDA is that the entire process is controlled and repeatable. It's common sense stuff when you really look at it. And people think that the FDA can be burdensome and overly so. But in reality, it's just common sense. They want to know that if you can produce a laser console product, that you can keep producing it. And inclusive of even your supply chain, things like that you understand that. So my background is in that. And then I also started doing, as I mentioned, writing. I also was able to write the testing protocols and validation protocols for that, because in a lot of military work, like I've done a lot of DARPA work, you have to write monthly reports. And I ended up being the one to write the monthly reports and was able to understand how to write them clearly and actually enjoy writing them. It didn't bother me to do it. So those two crucial elements helped my career as far as I got in med device, because that talent coupled with my educational experience, really 1 + 1 was equal more than 2 in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Jack, C6 Systems focuses on what you call the step zero R&D, helping founders with proof of concept for their medical devices.
Right.
When did you realize this early stage support was such a critical, underserved need in the medical device startup ecosystem? And what's been key to guiding that? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great question. We've done a lot of R&D optical work for large med device companies. We've done work for Alcon and Edwards Lifesciences and Johnson & Johnson. Just the little nuggets of R&D. Like they'd have us look at a new technology that was coming out and saying, could this work for our product? Could we re-engineer our existing product offering around this new technology, leverage economies from it, either financially or in better treatment outcome, better delivery of treatment? And then we were approached by small startups and founders, because we're a small boutique company. We have a staff of about 11 people. We can grow it to whatever we want. So our expenses are light. We can expand or grow with that. And what we found pretty quickly, there's that old saying, if you build it, they will come. Well, that's not true in med device. If you spend your uncle's money and the money contributed from your aunt and uncles and you cash out your 401k as a med device founder and you build a unit, that's not enough. And I've been doing this long enough that yes, I'm enamored by the technology. I enjoy, and our team enjoys developing technology, but we also help look at the economics, meaning we help mature the technology, but we help mature the awareness of the founders that they too have to expand and understand what it is to operate and be in a regulated space. I'm dealing with a startup as we speak that, is looking like, do we really have to get an FDA? Do we really have to do a 510K? And it's like, well, you do if you want to be in the US or Canada.
Exactly. If you want to be in the game. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And conversely, there are, there have been situations where we've been approached by founders who have what I would call therapeutic devices. And they wanted to get FDA approval. And, it's not treating a particular condition. Think of it like a heated massager or something like that. And I'm not trying to depreciate it. These are valuable things. And some of them I said, getting an FDA approval, may not benefit you, right? So there's a naivete in thinking that if you get FDA approval, it's like, you're in the Amazon store, right? That you're on the shelf of med device and then people can buy your product or gains you some access to market or sales that you wouldn't have. That's true, but it's not a commerce issue, right? And so on 2 occasions, I've talked founders out of it. I said, I don't know that you getting FDA approval would really benefit you, at this time. I mean, maybe later when you have the money, but if you want to get the product to market, I think you can just do it now as just a basic therapy device, like a heating pad or something like that would be. And then later, if you want to develop a version of the product, then yeah, go for your de novo or 510K. So yeah, I've found there's a lot of naivete. As I grew C6, I spent time with the founders and the inventors, and I spent a lot of my time early on explaining the regulated space process, that they have to have a quality system, that they have to document what they're trying to build, right? They have to literally write down what they want to build, what they want it to do, what do they believe the outcomes would be, what is the activity of the doctor, what is the activity of the patient, and things like that. And they found it kind of odd, like, really, can we just do that later? I'm like, no, because FDA and 510K, they also look at timelines. So you have to write the requirements before you build the device, and then you have to test the device after you wrote the requirements, right? And done
That's right.
the whole flow process for it. And you can't just backdate things. It doesn't
Yeah,
work.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, that kind of follows on with my next question is you've mentioned the significant burden of compliance for medical device providers starting almost at day one. How are you thinking about evolving regulatory landscape, particularly with the new requirements like usability, and what strategies do you find most effective helping startups integrate these?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, what we assist people is twofold development. One, you have to see if your technology can be brought to bear. And there's always an expense of it, right? Meaning, I want to build this device, but you have to be cost conscious. Is it manufacturable at a reasonable cost? Can you find the supply chain? So you've got to do that, because if you can't build a product economically, I recall like the LensX console for Alcon, originally the cost when LensX was a startup, it was in the $400,000 and $500,000, and that's just not going to work, so they had to force to get the cost down, and they had to pare it down. And then in parallel, as I mentioned, you have to start building your pile of paper. You have to start writing what your requirements are, what your usability is, even basic things like, okay, I have this medical device. Who's dispensing the treatment? Is it a doctor? Is it a nurse? What type of medical background do they require? What does the patient do? What do you mean, what does the patient do? Is the patient standing? Are we standing in the parking lot? No. Oh, he comes in the doctor's office. Oh, it's in a doctor's office. Okay. It's not in a surgical suite? No, it's not in a surgical suite. Well, see, you have to kind of figure that out, right? Because if it's in a surgical suite, now you got hospitals involved, right? Yes, doctors and hospitals work together, but they're two different entities in most cases. So you have to figure out what your landscape looks like in that regard. So then you have to start building that your requirements document usability. Usability is important now. That's something relatively new that used to be optional and the FDA makes mandatory. What is usability? Usability is literally you build your device and then you get a quorum of 10 or 15 doctors and or nurses or whomever is going to dispense the treatment from your device. You have a script, meaning you have requirements. You write requirements for usability. What does that mean? In usability, you would say, okay, Donald, what I expect is that the patient walks in the room, is seated before the device. I look into their eye. I set up the parameters. I dispense the treatment. The patient is done. This should all take about 2.5 minutes. Okay. So in usability, you would test that. You would test, did the patient sit down as you planned? Was the system able to reach their eye, or were they too tall or too short? What if the patient's in a wheelchair and they can't lean forward? How do we, things like that. What's the doctor doing, right? Does the operation of the device require 3 hands and most doctors only have 2, right?
Right.
Does it require
Yeah.
sterility? Meaning, do I have to, as the treatment doctor, do I have to touch the patient, interact with the patient by direct contact, but then I'm touching the machine, which means there's a sterility field issue, right? So you have to kind of play all those things, meaning when you write the requirements for the product and you say, well, we have to maintain sterility, then now you say, well, now I'm touching the patient, I'm touching the device to operate the device. How do I maintain a sterile field? And you can design that into your product. You would design that into the treatment workflow. So that's the other thing, the burden. You have to write how you operate the device in treatment to maintain everything that you proclaim to, including sterility. So you have to address that. That's why, for example, in usability, you would also have nurses, because the nurses are the ones who roll the console or device in the room. They're the ones that prep it. They may even log in and enter the patient information into the device, connect it to the doctor's, network. And then the doctor would just come in and pilot the plane, right? Think about airplane pilots. They don't fuel the plane. They don't stock the fridge in the plane. Okay. They don't put toilet paper in the bathroom in aircraft. There's a different crew that do that, but they work in concert, right? So you have to make sure when the pilot goes and pulls on a stick and takes the plane off so we can all get to Hawaii, that there's fuel in the tank. The bathroom, there's water in the kitchen, there's coffee, right? All of that. Again, common sense stuff. Does it sound? Yes, it can come across as world hunger. Oh my God, really? We have to think about all of that? Yes. Just like if you want to get to Hawaii on vacation, you need everything in the plane and all the parts on the plane, including the staff correctly trained for that situation and to implement that type of therapy and treatment.
Yeah, that's really good. That's amazing because I'm sure you see this all the time with the new startups. You're having to guide them through every step of this to make sure they think about it, that they have it.
Yeah, and we also help. We're very pragmatic in helping when they have to do it, right? And
Right.
I say it this way: look, all I need you to do, Donald, is to be aware of it. Okay, at some point, that little dot on the horizon, it's coming towards you. It's going to get bigger. Okay, and at some point, that dot's going to block your whole path if you don't address it. Okay, it's not a bad thing. It's just something that you have to put on your radar as far as your awareness as far as what you have to address and what you haven't addressed. And also, if I may, with startups, they're looking at getting funded, right? They're looking at either getting angel investor funding, 500,000, 1 million or 2, Series A funding. They have to have an awareness of this because very savvy med device, funding and venture capital groups are aware of these things. They're aware of the dots on the horizon. Because guess what? At Series A funding, those dots are the size of, oak trees. Okay.
Absolutely.
And if you haven't figured out what your go-to market strategy is, or who's going to use it, and things like that, they're not going to write you a check. They're going to
Oh,
go,
yeah.
look, you haven't thought about it. You know, Tesla was successful with the electric car because that electric car drives on the roads that combustion vehicles drive on. We didn't have to invent a new road for that car. But if Tesla made a car that was 11 feet wide and we had to invent a
Mhm.
new road for it,
It's not
it
gonna
sounds
work.
silly. It sounds
Right.
silly. This has happened. Here's a really practical example. The wall plug in your office or in my office here, I can pull 15 amps. Okay. Standard circuit breaker for an office or, doctor's suite is 15 amps. Currently, we're developing a laser console that has 2 lasers that are 100 watts each. There's 200 watts and they're 50% efficient. So I need to pull 400 watts. That's 20 amps. Okay. I can't even plug this device in. Okay. So we're helping develop the device. and I can't even plug it into the doctor's wall plug. I'll put the lights out in the building. Okay.
Of course. Yeah.
Right now, there's a way to solve it technically in that you store the energy in like capacitors because it's a laser system and the laser's pulsing. So I'm storing the energy in a capacitor like a balloon. I inflate a balloon and then I deflate it to get the pulse out. And then I reinflate it again during the relaxing time. So it's like breathing in and breathing out. And when you're breathing out, I'm giving energy, but when you breathe in, I have time to recharge. So I can design a power supply system that's drawing maybe 8 amps all the time, but it's charging these banks so that the system runs.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So that design costs money to do. Now, the initial product, guess what? We have 2 big power supplies and I've got it plugged into 2 different circuit breakers, right?
Of course.
And here's why. I've been doing technology a long time. The 15 amp and charged stored energy, that's a solvable problem. Okay. On a technical scale of 1 to 10, that's about a 1. All right. My double E's can solve that. So I don't want to spend a lot of time making that a critical path block. And that's something I see too is, I'll be candid, when you're working with engineers and I am one, I still am one, but my mindset has been elevated a bit. Not every technical thing requires, kind of this whole focus of the group's attention, you just kind of move on. A great example that I use, my role now is systems engineering. People ask, what's a system engineer do? And I have a really good analogy for that. Your car has 4 tires, but you have only 1 spare in the trunk. Okay. An engineer would put 4 spare tires in the trunk of your car because there's 4 tires and he can count. Okay.
Right.
But a system engineer is going to go, when I look at statistics, economics, right? What you want to pay for a car and the fact you like trunk space, I'm going to put 1 spare in your trunk. And now they're putting 0, right? Because
That's right.
the roads are better, right? Cars are better. Trucks are better. People aren't dropping things on the road to puncture tires. Okay. That's what system engineering is. You kind of learn where to put things in critical path and not everything is in critical path.
Yeah.
So those types of issues day to day we deal with.
Yeah. That's crystal clear. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
You work in laser-based ophthalmology, particularly in the areas like cataract surgery and glaucoma, which is cutting edge. What's been the most surprising about the advancements in light therapy for ocular tissues, and how do you see C6 systems continuing to contribute to these innovations?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So in the past 10 or 15 years, there's been a huge development in skin aesthetics and cosmetics with laser therapy. If you talk to your wife or spouses, they're getting all types of laser skin therapy. There's fractional CO2. And the basic mechanism you're trying to elicit is you're trying to create a minor amount of damage to the cells. And in the repair mechanism, you also realize rejuvenation. So like fractional CO2 is literally they shoot a grid of holes with spacing into your skin. I've had it done to me, and it triggers repair and also tightens your skin. It affects the collagen, it tightens it up. And basically aesthetics is doing collagen, which is the layer just below the dermis there. It turns out that biological effect actually operates in all of the tissues in your body, including the eye. So we've worked on ophthalmology about 15 years. We've made systems that fire laser light onto the lens, onto the cornea, and then through the lens to the back of the eye, which is the retina. So your eyeball's a camera. The retina's in the back. That's the sensor. And your pupil and cornea is the lens that focus the light. Basically, it's a pinhole camera. What they're finding now is that eye conditions like macular degeneration and glaucoma, there are some efficacies in these light therapy treatments. They're starting to understand that these affect it. Although they're 2 different conditions. Macular degeneration, in very simplest terms, is just the back of your eye, that tissue's just getting old. Just as, your skin gets old and it gets wrinkly, your retina does that. And it's the optic nerve, it's the sensor, and that becomes, degraded over time. It happens based on genetics and other conditions. Not everybody's susceptible to it. Glaucoma is a different issue. Glaucoma is your eye is a sphere of fluid. That fluid is exchanged in your eye. And what happens in one of the mechanisms in glaucoma that they observe to understand you have glaucoma is your ocular pressure, your eye starts to inflate because the fluid exchange is not occurring. That's done through a small valve in your eye. And the current procedures to treat it, you'll lose your vision with glaucoma. What'll happen is your eye it's basically like if you have swelling in your arm and you don't stop the swelling, you're going to have necropathy. The cells are going to die, and they're going to have to cut it off. Literally, you'll lose the side of your eye. So current interventions are they put a stent in, literally like they put a stent in your heart valve. They go in a closed valve and they just put a little, looks like a Chinese finger pencil of like chain link fence material. They go in there and they inflate a balloon, they stretch it, and they open up, and they do that to your eye. Of course, that's very evasive because that valve is extremely tiny. I'm talking about like a pencil lead. And now what they're finding is, not finding, but in the biology of your eye, there's a circular canal called a trabecular mesh. And that's where the fluid is going through the color part of your eye. And that's kind of the gutter. And they're finding that if you can put a hole in that gutter, mechanically or otherwise, that seems to release the ocular pressure and lowers the pressure of the eye. There's two ways to do that, as I mentioned, mechanically. And there's companies now, actually one of them was one of the founders of the LensX femtosecond laser system for cataracts, has developed treatment of firing the laser actually through and into your eye. So imagine it's kind of a magic act, firing a laser through the window of your house, and I can, hit something on your kitchen counter, and the window that the laser is going through is not affected. So they can fire the beam through the lens at the trabecular mesh, create an opening, and lower the pressure. And then there's systems where they do it mechanically. They go in with a fiber optic, they put a fiber optic inside a hypodermic needle tube, very tiny thing. And that's something we developed for a client. And they go in mechanically against the trabecular mesh and fire that. And let me speak to that for a minute, because
Yeah, sure.
here's an interesting thing too, right? That one console with the magical laser that fires through the glass and all that. What's really nice about it is you don't open the flesh, so there's not a sterility issue. Literally, you could do it in the parking lot. Okay. And bacterial infecting a patient is a super high risk. Okay. Most people may be not aware unless they've really dealt with themselves or family members in hospitals. Cross infection in hospitals is really a serious concern. And people with compromised immune systems, they need to stay out of hospitals unless they really need treatment. So sterility is really important. And these kinds of treatments are really attractive, especially for people with, let's say, compromised immune systems who have a secondary condition. But the issue I want to point to is people say, well, you've already got this magical laser console. Why would you develop a manual one with a hypodermic? Well, look, there's Mercedes-Benz and there's Mitsubishi cars. They're both cars. They'll get you to work, but they're different markets. And there are people who can afford certain types of medical treatment and certain people who can't. There's a huge advantage to the lower technology offering, right? Like if I had a laser that would stop bleeding, that would be great. But you know what? If you're on the soccer field, just put a Band-Aid on it yourself. Okay?
Exactly.
There's a market for that, right? There's a market for Band-Aids where you can put them on yourself and a little bit of antibiotic, and so there's a different market for the product. And that's the other awareness that we help founders and startups look at is like, where do you want to be? Right. And there's competition. Hospitals, if you've been to a hospital, they're full. They don't have empty rooms. They don't have available surgical suites. They have usually equipment stocked in the hallways, right? I mean,
That's right.
if you're in critical care areas and things like that, they have lots of equipment. They're good. So to get them to adopt and bring in a new piece of equipment, you'd better bring some real benefits to the hospital, right? Not only in patient care and efficacy, but in economics, right? In third and fourth derivative economics, because you're going to potentially displace other things in the hospital, okay? So that's why you want to sometimes tailor your product. And all of us, look, when we have an idea, we believe it's the greatest idea, and we want to see it everywhere, but that may not be the thing, right? I mean, ice cream's wonderful, but not for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It has a time and place. And that's the thing you have to think of is, what is the time and place in that regard?
Well, you highlighted the critical importance of understanding Medicare reimbursement codes and the broader economic landscape for medical treatments. For clinic leaders and healthcare innovators listening, what's one piece of advice you'd offer to ensure their innovative solutions are not just technologically sound, but also economically viable with the current healthcare system?
Well, it's something it's part of my conversation. It's been interleaved in the narrative that I've been bringing, and it's not a deliberate act on my part. It's just part of the gray hairs I have is learning that, you have to have the treatment. You have to understand the economics of it, not your economics. Like, what does it cost us to build this product and what can we sell it for? But what's it cost the doctor or the hospital to dispense the treatment? How often can they dispense the treatment? and how are they going to reap the benefits? Because the really sophisticated sales, they're selling the hospital the economics of the device, right? And how it'll lower the burden, lower the treatment burden, lower their liability, lower their risk. And it may sound like I'm divorced from the excitement of technology and helping people. I'm not, but I have painfully seen startups utterly fail. They had great ideas, but they just discounted the market approach, and they discounted the fact that they needed to understand what the doctor or the hospital challenges that they're facing. And they said, look, once they have the product, they're just going to see how cool it is and they won't worry about it. It's like, no, not at all. Well, look, it's just like the Mitsubishi and the Mercedes, right? I mean, gosh, everybody wants to save money. We should all be driving Mitsubishis around. And I mean, no disparity against Mitsubishi, right? Because it's a lot less than a Mercedes. I mean, I could buy three Mitsubishis for the price for Mercedes. So why is Mercedes even in the market? Yet they are. So you have to really acknowledge those things, and you have to integrate it into your whole concept and your approach to your product, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thinking about the long game, you've worked with many startups and few survive. What types of signals or metrics are you really honed in on to assess a startup's potential for long-term success beyond the initial technological breakthrough?
That's a great question. And I've worked with startups, and I've sat through venture capital pitches, VC pitches, and pitch decks. That's one thing. You have to have a pitch deck. And the pitch deck is basically, selling your technology, your idea, your concept, including the economics of it, who's going to buy it. And there's all kinds of alphabet soup. There's, TAM, total obtainable market, total addressable market. There's TOM, total obtainable market, things like that, where you really at least have to demonstrate that you have awareness of that. And I think what people need to do is to surrender to those aspects that heavily influence the success of their design. The other thing you don't want to be is you don't want to be so entwined with your idea. And I have seen, conversations after pitches with VCs going, that individual is too entwined with their own idea. It's like, we're not investing in the product, we're investing in the person.
Exactly.
And it happens that a lot of inventive people also believe they know the way to do it, and they want to take their path to success. And without an awareness of how to do this in a regulated space, sometimes they'll double down and they say, this is how I want to do it. Right. And you'll find this out. Right. I'm sorry to say, I have family too and friends, and I see them going, I did it my way. I'm like, well, but maybe getting it done is more important than doing it your way. And,
Right.
quite often, we have to take people, what the old saying is, behind the woodshed, right? And
That's
you got to
right.
say, look, you have to surrender this. You got to give up, right? You got to you don't want to die on this hill. You got to lay your sword down.
That's right.
This isn't the battle to fight. Take advice from somebody else, or modify your product because, you're being parasitic to other treatments in the hospital that are very successful for the hospital. That happens too. You're doing things other devices do, maybe better, faster, and more exciting. And they go, look, people just aren't going to do it, right? I mean, think about
Yeah.
it this way: McDonald's sells, probably the most hamburgers in the world, right? Is it the best hamburger in the world? No, no, it's not. But it's the most popular, right? So you kind of need that trifecta, right? You need to have
That's right.
the right product with the right marketing for the right audience. And that combination is what creates success, right? It doesn't need to be perfect. And so, yeah, having to surrender is really important, and we just, we talk like Apple. Look what happened with Apple. Steve Jobs, the founder, they had to vote him out
Yeah. Oh,
because
yeah.
he
Yeah.
became so rigid in his process. And some of this gets, reinforced by success, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
you have an idea and then someone gives you money for it, Donald. Like, I'm an angel investor and I give you $500,000, and you're going, man, what a smart boy I am. Right. And it reinforces a lot of good things and a lot of negative things in our human nature. And if you don't have a good team around you, if you're not able to take good advice and surrender to that, it can be toxic
Yeah.
to it. And I've
Oh,
seen a lot of
absolutely.
startups go out because of that toxicity, right?
Right.
People have what's been successful before, and how I want to do it, or doing things on the cheap, right? We'll do that later, or we'll do something, less cost effective. I'm like, well, you don't want to do that either, right?
Exactly. Pretty much, my next question was you pretty much answered a lot of it with that. You've seen the transition from startups to mature organizations many times. What's the biggest mind shift that the founders need to make successfully navigate that transition. And I think you were speaking to it there,
Yeah.
where they have to be amenable to it. They need to take criticism when they need it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and sometimes you just got to be flexible as well.
You really do. I mean, you have to bring everybody into the idea. I mean, I've learned that. I mean, I'm a really smart guy, but I was grateful that I worked with some real titans in industry back in the military, some people who had worked on the Apollo program and on the space shuttle, and they taught me humility. I remember working with one engineer, and for about 2 or 3 months. And then I found that after he had like 25 patents to his name, really impressive stuff. And he was just the nicest guy in the world. And, he'd share his lunch with you. And I great admiration for that. And it
Right.
pulls you in, right? And I
Sure.
think demonstrating some vulnerability is really important, right?
Yeah.
In every
Absolutely.
relationship, business and personal, right?
Right.
Because you don't know the answers all the time, and I don't either. And so asking people for what their thoughts are and why they have them can pull people in, and also it lowers their guard, and now you can come closer in their inner circle, and they feel you as a confidant, and they can take your advice because you have shown your vulnerability and your lack of awareness, and they can demonstrate that too. That's a healthy thing. I mean, in VC pitches, look, if you're giving a VC pitch, you'd better say I don't know at least once or twice. If you walk in
Absolutely.
there acting like you know the answer to every question, no,
It's not going to happen.
not at all, because nobody knows
Right.
everything. And they ask you questions just to see if you're going to do that. They want to know if you're too married to the idea, right? If you're going to give
Right.
it up. So
Exactly.
there's a lot of humanity involved in it, fortunately. And the beautiful thing is it's all within your power to do, right? You can just decide, look, I'm just going to surrender to this. I'm going to listen to what people are saying and do it. Yeah.
Jack, what else should I have asked? What would you like to speak to our audience about?
I guess the other thing is there's a lot of regulatory requirements, as I said, in regulated space, and there's lots of requirements to build an organization as you build a product, and that's something that founders and startups have to do. Is they have to start growing the organization. They need a quality management system. They need a quality person, and one way to do that effectively is it's called fractionalized executives, right? And that's something that C6 does. We can be contracted to be your fractionalized. I can be your CTO fractionalized. I can be your R&D department, your manufacturing support department, test engineering department, things like that. And that's some of the roles that we play. And learning to partner, right? Steal from the best, right? If you see and admire actions that people take, you incorporate them into your thing because you want the product is like a child. You want it to be successful, right? And you're going to send it to college. You're going to send it to college where it will learn things that you will never know.
That's right.
And that's if you really want the product to be successful, you have to go, look, I want the best of the best. And I'm willing to surrender myself to get the best of the best advice I can get, the best participation I can get. And I think that's really good too, is the educating yourself in all those aspects of it as a founder, for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Well, that's very good advice. Well, Jack, thanks so much for sharing your insights. I
Certainly.
think this was incredibly valuable, and I think our audience will really appreciate it.
Well, I enjoy speaking about it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Donald, thank you. And thank your audience.